This video is brought to you by the awesome team at FitBeast. Good morning campers. As the guy who perpetually turns up at the gym wrapped head to toe in tape just to keep my body together, trust me, I've done the long hard yards, looked all over the internet and tried everything in the book to try and recover faster. So if you're like me and everything just bloody hurts, then it's time to learn to deal with it. So with that in mind, let's go over the most common aches and pains that will eventually nag at every climber and my personal experience dealing with them to get you back on the wall and this time avoid those pesky injuries. So let's start off with my latest, the good old lumbrical. This is an injury generally associated with pockets and one that I wish I knew about before I sustained the injury. The lumbricals are connective muscles that sit in the palm of your hand and connect to the tendons instead of the bone. When you injure the lumbrical, generally it's pretty hard to pinpoint where it actually hurts because it seems to radiate all over the hand and down your wrist and into the forearm. Now, I'm not a medical professional or a physio, so I'm not going to go in depth about the science here since each one could probably take a whole 10-minute video in itself. So instead, I'll be focusing on just the best ways to avoid these injuries in the first place or how to manage it. But essentially, the lumbricals are most commonly injured because they're attached to two of the tendons in your hand. When we go for a pocket, generally those fingers tend to pull down straight and the other fingers tend to curl down like they're making a fist because it feels like we can generate more power that way. Which in fact, due to something known as the Quadriga effect and a study by Schweizer in 2001, actually does help generate about 48% more power. Unfortunately, because of that, one side ends up pulling up while the other side pulls down, causing the muscles to tear in the middle, leading to the lumbricals being injured. The best way to avoid this is to keep all the fingers as straight as possible, and if you have the space, just keep all the fingers up. But if not, tuck them down from the first knuckle down from your palm. This will keep the lumbricals straight and stop them from tearing. As the climbing Dr. Matt DeStefano puts it, when in doubt, Spider-Man. If it's too late and the injury has already happened, like with me, RICE is always the first protocol to go for in any injury. So rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Rest for the first 1 to 2 weeks to allow the injury to heal. The worst thing that you could possibly do is load the already weakened muscles and cause it to tear further, making that recovery that much longer. After the 2 weeks, start loading it progressively with some light hangboarding. My personal protocol is 30-second hangboarding on 20mm edges, just to start strengthening up the hand again and climbing on bigger holds to avoid straining those tendons and muscles before they're actually fully functional. After the first 48 hours of the injury, move from ice to heat. The goal there is just to increase circulation as much as possible to help promote healing. This is essentially the same protocol that you would use for any sprain you sustain during climbing. RICE first, then run through the 4-step protocol suggested by Matt. 1, unload the affected tissue, so that's the rest component. 2, improve mobility, so just general movement. 3, improve strength, so that's the loading component of this. 4, restore optimal movement, so that's the stretching component, just to make sure that you have the optimal movement with the optimal strength. As tempting as it is to continue climbing, rest will always be step 1 to recovery, but as you can see, it's only temporary. A lot of doctors will tell you to continue resting until the pain has completely subsided, and honestly, a lot of doctors are absolutely rubbish and have no clue about sports-related injuries. The amount of times I've been told to just rest is amazing. 8 months of no climbing and just resting, and one of my worst injuries, a nagging tendon pain that had given out in my ring finger, had absolutely zero change. The doctor just told me that if it still hurts, then it's your body telling you that it needs more rest. No x-rays, no MRIs to confirm, just oh, it still hurts after 8 months, just keep resting. Absolutely useless. That I guess is a good transition on how I ended up fixing that issue. So after 8 months of that pain and absolutely no change, I went into desperation mode and booked a myotherapist to have a look. I had previously been to a myotherapist about a knee problem a long time ago, but honestly, they didn't really help that much, so I wasn't too keen on wasting that money again. But like I said, I was pretty desperate and I had to try something. I booked a different myotherapist this time, had the initial consultation, and long story short, I was stuck with needles all over my forearm and hand for a session of dry needling. Whether it was coincidence or not, about 3 to 4 days later, the pain in the finger vanished. It still was really weakened and I couldn't really load it too much, but I could actually load it without crying out in pain. Dry needling now has become a monthly tune-up session for me to keep my forearms and shoulders from being overly tight. It just helps keep mobility and flexibility of my joints to help me avoid further injuries. It's also helped me deal with Decovein's tendosynovitis, which affects the thumb side wrist, which is the perfect segue to dealing with tendonitis and tendosynovitis. Along with dry needling, I also wore a thumb brace for a while, maybe 2-ish months, to ensure that I was keeping the thumb straight as much as possible, just to help with that Decovein's. The issue usually comes around just due to the nature of climbing, with repetitive hand movements and pinching, which ends up aggravating the tendons. So as always, technically the best treatment will be rest. But the best way to handle pain and injury is always to avoid it in the first place. Prevention is always better than cure. That's why strengthening those tendons and muscles while ensuring mobility isn't left out either is important to avoid those nagging pains in the first place. That's why I was more than happy to accept the offer from today's sponsor FitBeast, who provided me with their awesome set of flex bars. These flex bars are aimed to target tendon pain in the elbow, whether it be tennis, which is on the outside of your elbow, or golfer's elbow, which is on the inside, both of which I've had in the past. The Tyler Twist, which aims to target tennis elbow, and the reverse Tyler Twist, which targets golfer's elbow, have both become the gold standard to helping fix that pain. For the Tyler Twist, first just hold the flex bar in front of you, pointing up with the affected elbow. Grab the upper end of the bar with the other hand facing away from you. Twist the bar with the top hand until both of your palms are facing down. Then, with the injured side, just release the tension slowly. The reverse Tyler Twist essentially is the same, but your hands face the opposite direction. So first hold the flex bar with the affected arm and point the bar downwards. With your other arm, turn your palm facing the front and grab the other side of the bar. Then, just like before, twist, but this time your hand should be facing upwards. Slowly release with the affected hand and boom, rep 1. I do about 10 reps of these before I climb, and preferably 3 sets, but I do end up being lazy and just end up doing 2. But the great thing about these is how easy it is to actually have with you at all times. So I do end up just using it while I watch TV in bed. Honestly, this has been a pretty big game changer for me because of how much it's actually helped with my golfer's elbow. The flex bars come in 3 different resistances, but I've found that the medium works best for me. The red one is quite hard for twisting exercises, but I found it's ideal instead for doing the U-bend exercises, which target the supinator muscles and pronator muscles of the forearm, which also help relieve the pain of golfer's or climber's elbow. The lightest of the set, the green bar, is for those of you with weakness running in your veins. Your ancestors would be disappointed. But in all seriousness, it's fairly light, so this one is probably saved just for those with pretty severe injury and slowly rehabbing it back. The TPE material is super grippy, honestly a bit too grippy, because it actually ends up feeling like it'll blister my hands with all the rubbing it does, so I actually do it with my compression gloves on just to help stop the rubbing. Now, I also have really poor wrist strength and mobility. That's why the flex bars are great, because they double up to deal with the elbow pain as well as strengthening my wrist with whatever this exercise is called. If you do want to pick up your own set, I've put a link down in the description. And if you're suffering from elbow pain, honestly, get one now. They really do fix the issue in like 2-ish weeks of using it. And they're so inexpensive that I wish that every climbing gym just had these lying around. Now, something that's pretty hotly debated is the use of tape. I specifically use 2 types of tape when I climb. First is the climbing tape, which is semi-rigid, which I just use to give my finger extra support from hyperextending too much when full crimping. I generally just tape the finger down by crossing an X through the front side of the finger with the finger held in a bent position. There are studies that have shown that taping doesn't really provide any extra protection against finger injuries, but for me it feels nice having that extra tension from the tape as support, even if it just adds enough tension for me to be conscious of how much is running through the finger. Personally, I think it does help. If you have an injured finger, buddy taping the finger to an adjacent finger can also help by just ensuring that the finger isn't working alone. Though personally, I just generally don't bother. I do tape up though when my fingers are starting to feel sore though, so I know a lot of you who are starting will inevitably get a flapper. I have a few tips regarding this superficial but absolutely gross injury. The first, climb until your skin is sore, then cover it up with tape to protect it from rubbing further. You want to climb enough so that your skin is able to actually build some calluses so that your skin toughens up enough to not rip, but also you have to make sure that you don't rip it, otherwise it's back to the start. 2, if you have calluses, file or sandpaper them down. Calluses are good because it's toughened up skin, but if they're sticking out too much, it's more likely to rip. The third, stop moving around while you climb. A lot of people get flappers because they move their hand too much and jump around too much. When I first started climbing, I focused purely on static climbing and didn't get a flapper for like the first 6 to 7 months, not until I started dynoing. 4, if it rips, keep the skin on, just chuck a band-aid on, tape it up and keep going. It's not gonna kill you. Back to taping though, the second type of tape that I use is Kino tape, which just has a little bit more flexibility. I use this tape around my joints for support, specifically my shoulders and my wrist. Again, I have shockingly terrible wrists, and while you climb, a lot of the time your weight will be pulling you down. So while about 59 of my kilos is pulling you down, my hands are staying put. So the tape just helps keep the joints around my wrist a bit tighter together and not move around so much without affecting my mobility. Y'all can say whatever you want about this one, but for me, this 100% helps. I will say though that there is a particular brand that costs double what other brands cost that many of you will be familiar with. There is absolutely no difference in quality with cheaper brands, so opt for the cheap stuff. Now, the most common injury for climbers is obviously going to be the finger injuries. A lot of people become worried when they feel pain around the knuckle closest to the nail. Honestly, this is probably the most common ache that climbers end up facing, and for the uninitiated, the question is always, so should I climb or rest? For me, it's never been too much of an issue. While it does ache, I can still climb perfectly normal once it's warmed up. The thing is though, if you leave it and don't do anything about it, it just becomes a constant nagging pain that's always there. For me, this is probably the best sign that you need to start hangboarding. Hangboarding helps strengthen your fingers without shock loading them by cranking hard or jumping on small holes. You don't need to go to the extreme and hang with weights like the pros. Emil Abrahamson has a great video of doing hangboarding training without even coming off the ground, which showed some amazing results. If you want specific protocols, there are free ones available as well on the Crimped app, which I also recommend, but the most important part here is consistency. Randomly hangboarding every now and then isn't going to help. Find a program you want to follow and stick with it. It takes 10 minutes, maybe twice a week, and the finger issues will magically just vanish. It's amazing what stronger fingers will do. Earlier I spoke about making sure you don't neglect mobility as well, and in regards to that, it's also a good idea to incorporate tendon glides into your exercises. It's really simple, and honestly, you can do this randomly throughout the day as well, but it's a good way to just ensure good mobility of your tendons and the fingers by allowing a full range of motion. All you have to do is focus on bending each joint in your hand. So tips to the top of your palm, fingers straight to a fist, tips to the base of your palm, and then fingers straight into a 90-degree angle to the palm. Really simple, and again, you can do it throughout the day, wherever you are. Again, honestly, these are all just different ways I've been able to manage my perpetually broken body because I can't help myself and just keep limit climbing every session. There is so much I could still talk about, but in the end, if you want to get rid of the aches and pains or get back on the wall faster, the good old classics unfortunately are always what it comes back down to. Lots of rest, allow your body to repair itself, lots of water to help circulation, a good diet to give your body the required nutrients and building blocks, and plenty of exercises to strengthen your body so it doesn't break in the first place. I once again want to thank FitBeast for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check them out and let me know what injuries you guys are currently facing, and I'll try my best to help you guys get back on your feet. If there's anything you want me to go deeper on in another video, do let me know down in the comments below as well. Thanks for watching. As always, I'll see you legends next time.